Let's try this again. It pauses every time I get out of the camera. All right, so I'm Josh. I'm going to talk to you today about thoughts that I've gotten from Genesis 1:1. I've checked with my pastor, Neil Sanford, on what he thought it was, and he thought it was good. But I want to share it to you today on YouTube. So, who is God? Introduction to God. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God. I'm going to stop there for a moment. The way this sentence is set up shows that God was there before the beginning. In other words, God already existed before our timeline was in place before time began. This could mean that God exists outside of our time in a completely different dimension that exists outside of time. This is even possibly the first recording of another dimension existing. So God exists outside of our own dimension and is not subject to change or time. And God, if I'm not sure how many of you read the Bible, I'm sorry, but I've been through the Bible several times, and God is unchanging, even though it's to many people and to baby Christians, it looks as if God is more wrathful in the Old Testament than he is in the New Testament. But this was because there was no sacrifice that covered all sin. That's why in the New Testament, Jesus was that sacrifice to cover all sin. But you'll see in the Old Testament many times where it talks about God's love. Especially David, he talked about God's love many a time, and Job and whatnot. So, but let's move on. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created, putting a pause on yet again. But with the introduction of that one word, created, is rather important to think about it. Man is often wondering about where God came from. Did man create God? If God created man, who created God? These are thoughts that we often have as created individuals. They are indeed legitimate thoughts, however, they are flawed nonetheless. In the beginning, God created. God was the first one to create. We think as though God must have been created because we are limited to the thinking that everything was created, and to think otherwise is nonsense. We are rational beings, or at least we think we are. But our rationale is not God's rationale. Our thoughts are flawed. Our rationale is flawed. Our logic is flawed. And that's where we are limited to by being created individuals. God is not limited to that because God is not a created individual. He is who he is. And he says that himself, I am who I am. We think God must be created because we are limited to the thinking that everything was created, and to think otherwise is nonsense. We are rational beings, but God, however, existing separate from our own dimension outside of time, even does not adhere to our rationale. God's thoughts are higher than our own. It says this in the Bible. Isaiah 55:8-9, quoting from the English Standard Version. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. And so, to begin to understand God, we must stop and think in our own. We must begin to stop thinking in our traditional way of thinking, and accept that there are things like God we will never be able to understand. So what is the point of this, you ask? Is it still not man's passion to understand and be with God? Well, I'm going to ask you to take this journey with me to understanding God as I try to comprehend such a being and explain who he is to you through my writing, or my videos now. This is our introduction to understanding who God is, and you must first accept that God exists without a doubt, and then also understand that God does not need to be created because he is the creator, except that he does not conform to our rationale and begin to change your own rationale to accept God. So, that's my introduction, and I've thought about writing a book on who is God. It's just a very difficult concept. I've only gotten that far so far with my book. It's just the introduction and Genesis 1:1. But we can go further on and to prove that. Let's see. Let's start now. Let me think. Edit no. Let's. All right. So. Chapter 1. The unchanging God. Okay. So, God is indeed unchanging, as many would think. But we're going to save chapter 1 for the next video. I'm going to first write it out, and then I'll put it on a video for you guys. I hope you stay tuned and watch my videos, and I hope you are able to get a lot out of them, and I hope I help you grow in your faith of God, and help you grow in your understanding of who God is, because I think it's important to understand who God is. All right. Goodbye. God bless. I'll see you next time.